Oh my gosh, I am so grateful and so honored to introduce the incredible, gifted Jackie. She's an incredible holistic therapist and so much more. But that's really what a lot of her clients, name her. So she's, there's many gifts and talents. But welcome. We're so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And it's such deep, powerful healing work that you facilitate with people. And so I just so honor all that you do and how you show up in the world. And I would love to just, first of all, because I always find this so profoundly beautiful, like what got you on this path, why this path that you're on, the work that you're doing. I'd love for you to share that with us.
When I was 5, when they asked, what do you want to be when you grew up? I knew art teacher. So I knew art teacher right away. And I was lucky that I had parents that really supported my love of art. And I also had an elementary school art teacher who, as soon as I hit 4th and 5th grade, made arrangements with my teachers, and she would pull me and I'd get to teach some lessons to kindergartners and first graders. I was fortunate in that my inclination toward art was really supported by the people around me. And when it came time to go to college, I was torn between, do I go into art education or art therapy or graphic design? Because I also really liked that. So growing up, I always used art as the thing that I did that I knew would make me feel better. So like a lot of kids fall asleep reading, I would always fall asleep with art supplies in my bed. And as life got challenging, I knew that if I just sat on my floor and made art, I'd feel better about whatever it was. It was always a resource for me. One day in a bookstore, I followed the sections of things that I was interested in. So I followed the art section and the psychology section, and they met at one book for art therapy. So I learned that it was a thing. And this is where people started to get a little less supportive of what I wanted to do, because at that time, if you searched for jobs in art therapy, absolutely nothing would come up. So my parents were supportive, but they were like, why don't you go more the education route where we know you can get a job? And I did, because I loved working with kids through art, and I knew I wanted to work with people. But in the back of my mind, I always knew it was a stepping stone. So I got a master's in art education. And as soon as I started teaching, I was already in night school doing the prereqs that I needed to eventually go back to school for art therapy. Eventually, after teaching for a few years, elementary school art, I did go back to school for art therapy. And a few years earlier, I had graduated college early, so I could go volunteer with homeless children and moms in Brazil. And I brought with me an art education approach, because that was my training at that time. But I left that experience really wishing that I had the knowledge of an art therapist, because I felt like I would have been able to make more of the impact that I'd wanted to. That really drove me to get into art therapy as quickly as I could. And as a teacher, little concerning red flags would come up in the artwork. And it wasn't my role to process those with the kids. So I'd have to pass them on to a guidance counselor, and then I would never hear anything about it. So for me, that didn't feel quite right, because I had created the container that these red flags were coming up in, but it wasn't my role to process. Anyway, I had lots of reasons why I wanted to move into a career in art therapy. And in the background of all of that, so knowing that art therapy was really helpful, psychologically speaking, I had different chronic health conditions that I was dealing with. So I have struggled with hyperhidrosis my whole life since I was young. At 15, I was diagnosed with chronic migraines. I was getting 4 or 5 a week that I would need pain-killing prescriptions for. Some people think it's a curse, but I think it's a blessing. My body is like a canary in a coal mine. So I get the side effects to things very quickly. It's very apparent when I shouldn't be taking something. So for a while, the doctors kind of had me on a chain of trying, just a series of meds or a series of approaches. And even just for my hyperhidrosis, I had gotten to the step where the next step was to sever something in my brain. And I just looked at that doctor and I said, honestly, would you have your own daughter do that?
Wow.
And he was like, no.
Wow.
And so I knew I needed to find other ways to get a handle on that. And then with the migraines, when I started college, they put me on a medicine that was supposed to reduce migraines, but it made me depressed. And when I went to the doctor about that, they said, well, we'll give you an antidepressant. I said, no, like I can tell that this was already caused by that. So why don't we just get off all of it instead of starting this whole chain reaction of medications?
So at that age, having that awareness,
Thank you. Yeah, yes, I see that now because it wasn't difficult for me to advocate for myself in that environment, but I know for a lot of people it is.
Yeah.
So I am grateful for that. And I got to a place where I went to the doctor and I was just so certain and so clear. And I said, I don't want to get put on any more meds. I get the side effects of all of them. Yeah. Please tell me another way to take care of this. And I'm really grateful for this woman. She came back with her prescription pad. She said, don't tell anyone I'm doing this, but I'm writing the name of 2 books on this instead of 2 meds. God,
I got chills.
So she wrote the name of a couple of books. And she said, read these, see if they help. And I went and I read them right away. And they really helped me understand all of the different kinds of internal and external triggers that might be causing your migraines. And from there, it really helped me connect dots very quickly about things that I was eating or things that were in my environment that were actually just causing all of these migraines. And so when I was able to cut out all of those things and drastically reduce them, that got me really interested in the path of holistic health and really understanding how to use nutrition. And I was already exercising and stuff, but it helped me fine tune and become much more aware of how we can use nutrition to better fuel ourselves or to, create a lot of pain in ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we'll fast forward. I became an art therapist with the military, and the art therapy was incredibly powerful, especially because I was mostly doing trauma processing. And when people experience something traumatic, the verbal areas of their brain become inhibited. Mm-hmm. So then it's really hard to fully process what needs to be processed through verbal means. So the art therapy wound up proving itself to be a super potent tool to help really bring to the surface what was really underlying the symptoms and to really bring to the surface the core belief that was really driving a lot of suffering in the present. But I found that even with the awareness, some people, it had been so long that they had felt at peace or joy or happiness, like sadness and anger kind of became their new baseline. And so from there, I wanted to be able to bring yoga into the client work as well, so that through the art therapy, they were gaining the insight and the awareness, but through the yoga practices, they were able to actually feel what bliss in the moment feels like. Or, it's just, I could start co-treating with myself with these different tools. And because I got into that and they saw me as the art therapist and yoga teacher, they started asking me a lot more health related questions, but that wasn't my role. So I wound up getting certified in integrative nutrition health coaching so that I could make it more of my role. And we'll tie it into Feng Shui in a second. So on the professional course of things, when I had gotten into that, I had already been getting these pings about Feng Shui, but there was a module in the course that I had taken that was specifically on Feng Shui, and it just completely lit me up. And from then I was searching everything I could and eventually found you. And I had realized a few things. That one, professionally, it was going to be super important to bring into the work, because most of my career was spent in military hospitals and really state of the art, the ones that were newly built, like the jobs that I had, I was there on the ribbon cutting day or prior. And the clients would make a lot of gains when they were in this intensive treatment. But their main complaint when they would come back months later was, I made all these gains when I was focused so heavily on my treatment. But when I went home, I'd backslide because my environment was still where it was when I was initially seeking help. So I love that now that I'm private, I have the flexibility to not only do the art therapy and not only bring in the yoga and meditation, but I can do Reiki with clients when that's what's needed. And I can do full Feng Shui consultations with them so that their environment is really working for them in the background and fully lifting them up. I'm a fire person. So I also was naturally very goal oriented and type A, and definitely the kind of person who was like treating trauma 9 hours in the day and then training for a marathon or a triathlon or something at night, and like just always going 200%. But my body was breaking down. Like I was not giving it the time to rest. And I didn't think much of yoga previously, but when someone told me that they were doing yoga to help improve their running at that time, that piqued my interest. And so I made a New Year's resolution to get into yoga to help with my running. But when I was in those classes, what started out as being, okay, just go to yoga once a week. Then I would start going like 2 or 3 times a week. And then I had my whole era of cry yoga time where everything that was still held in my body was able to come out, and becoming a therapist, psychoanalyzing my whole life, doing yoga more, kind of all culminated into, I wound up getting divorced from my first marriage. And he left our condo before me, and he wanted to be a minimalist and not take much, which I don't blame him for. But at that time, I felt so much obligation to the stuff.
Yeah.
And I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment and brought a lot of the stuff. And I needed to downsize because it was too much stuff for my 1-bedroom. And I wound up, reading The Joy of Tidying Up, and, went through it and went through every single area of my home, picked up every single item of clothing, and just became really honest about, does this bring me joy? And was really surprised at what emotions certain objects were bringing up. And I wound up doing the whole thing, keeping certain things, taking pictures of certain things, donating certain things, gifting away certain things. But that was a really good cleansing process. And then I at first felt like a failure because I couldn't really afford that 1-bedroom. So I wound up moving into a studio. And at the time, it kind of felt like, oh my goodness, I can't even get divorced, right? Like it's just kind of backsliding. But moving into this little tiny studio was the best thing because all I could fit in it were the things that brought me joy. And I could really feel the difference. And it made me really intentional about everything that I was putting into my space and surrounding myself with. So that was kind of my intro without really realizing it. But when I was taking care of my mom during the pandemic and I was taking your courses, and I was really able to apply everything I learned and then start using it with clients too. Just the transformation you feel in your life so fast is just incredible.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing all of that. It's been such a journey, and I love hearing how really the whole journey has been your own personal journey through, and also just listening to what your clients need to really facilitate deep transformation and healing in their lives. Like, oh, okay, we can do this through art, the voice, you're not able to speak about this at this time, but we know that you can express how you're feeling, and what's going on through art, but okay, but now it's still in the body. Okay, let's do yoga therapy. And then, oh, but you're going home to an environment that you're making progress when you're not in, and then you go back to it and it's, it's like a few steps backwards almost. And we know how profound that is, being in a space that like we feel like we're being held in this sacred container and we're inspired and it's supporting who we are now, where we want to go versus like our past, right? And so we're kind of stuck. So I just love hearing about how you have, and as well as Reiki, and I know you're really, really gifted. And it's just this beautiful repertoire of tools. So you can really facilitate and see what's needed. And also it's everything that you use for yourself as well, from what you're sharing, your art, your yoga,
Exactly.
right? All of it. So I love that, because that's like you're walking your talk and then there's an embodiment of the practices. So I love hearing about all this led up to this. And I'm really intrigued. And what is it that you were mainly seeing while you were helping people in their environment that was activating, or I don't know if it was actually activating trauma or it was just not supporting the healing through it and the releasing? What were you noticing that was coming up in people's environments that was not supporting them?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that people grow up in an environment. So that's the environment they know.
Yeah.
And then we talk a lot in therapy about behaviors and how to break like behavioral patterns. But it's not until you really get to do Feng Shui with someone that you see how they're just totally subconsciously setting up their environment in the same way that's the one they grew up in. And of course they are, because that's what they know, but they don't know how to do it differently. Yeah, I think that's the best way I would say it. It just really gives people a much more profound awareness into how they're just subconsciously not intending to at all, but even just setting up their lives in the same way of patterns they're trying to break.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like when somebody comes into your home, it's so vulnerable and kind of so exposed because it tells the story of who you are. And, it's like we always say in Feng Shui, it's like an outward expression of how you're feeling internally. So if it piles of clutter, people are stuck in their lives. And if even all the furniture set up where it's really blocking the energy flow, it's like, okay, like where is all these blocks showing up in your life and this stuck energy, So we always say how intimate an experience and what an honor it is when you get to go into somebody's sacred space, into their home, where we spend, well, especially if we work from home, at least 80% of our time in there, So I love that you feel like, because I've said this, you can be in a therapy session with some people when you're in their home and they're sharing what's going on in their lives. It's a very intimate exchange, So then when you did the consultations, did you, and giving advice and guidance on how to create new patterns in the home, how well was it received? How easily? Like, I'd love to hear about the journey of, and maybe there's someone in particular you're thinking of, right? That you'd like to share with us about that, what you saw in the environment and maybe what your suggestions were, and did they follow through in those, and how did that shift things in their lives?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked with a lot of people who came from more chaotic homes, or homes where their parents were hoarders, or homes where a sibling died and then the whole home became kind of like a time capsule. And there are some people who, have their own home and it's also very cluttered. I've also worked with a lot of people who wind up having the complete opposite home, which is like scared to have anything. So everything is just like white walls, barely any furniture, no art. And so then it's a way different process to help them learn how to be like empowered and inspired when they're choosing what to put up, and helping them be really intentional about, what is the message that you want to see on a daily basis here. And that's really beautiful. And it's brought relationships and families together, because then they have fun finding the things that everyone likes for those spaces. And then I think another thing that's always surprising is when I do the space clearing, even if it's virtual and even if the family, like the kids have no idea I'm working with their parent, the first feedback I always get from people is, yeah, my kids came over and they were like, oh my God, it feels so good here. What happened?
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Gorgeous. And do you feel as well, not that we ever need permission, but do you think whether it was the person that grew up in the time capsule home, their home is now either completely cluttered or it's empty, like there's still plastic on the furniture, that way, like they didn't even take it out of that. Do you find that it's just bringing their awareness to, you don't have to have these piles of clutter, and this can, it's just like turning the light bulb on. It's just like, do having those clutter can really create a lot of blocks, or permission to, you can create beauty in your space, and what would you love to see and what would inspire you? Do you think it's even just like a perspective of, I can give myself permission to do this differently?
Yes. Yeah. For some people, for sure. For some people, that awareness definitely gave that push.
Yeah.
And then for other people, it's become more of a therapeutic process where I can bring my other tools in. So there was someone in particular who felt like she lost her, like out of touch with her own creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And the Feng Shui and seeing how her home was so barren was connected to the fact that her dad really squashed any sense of her personal creativity. So she needed an artwork representing water in a certain area of her home. And so then we talked about where she could sit down and create it, like what area of the home would fuel her creativity more. And for her, it became important, instead of going out to the store and finding a piece of artwork that resonated, it became really important for me to help walk her through actually creating something herself and like taking that power back.
Love that. Oh, that's beautiful. And so healing, and then inspiring to see her own artwork on the wall, like that's beautiful. Oh, and so then it just kind of opened her up again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's beautiful. Is there other stories that you'd like to share, or experiences you've had with clients in other kind of ways that you got them to do things in their space or invited them to create shifts?
Yeah, someone who wound up taking a lot of the Feng Shui work to her therapist, actually, because she already had a therapist that she was seeing, and she just hired me for the Feng Shui, not for all the holistic healing. So it wound up being quite a process because many people in her family had dumped a lot of things on her. So it was quite a process to help her release obligation to certain things and to recreate boundaries, because there are other people who could have shared in taking some of those things. So that person comes to mind because that really was a process. And I didn't speak to her therapist, but it was co-treating because she would take what we did back and forth. And I actually had interviewed her for the Using Feng Shui to Address Intergenerational Trauma presentation that I did for you. And even having her reflect on all of those questions brought up so much for her that wound up being so much further processing ground for her to do in therapy.
I love that. So, and will you speak a little bit more to that, to our listeners, explaining what that is and how you help and what that whole process is? Will you share a little bit more with us?
Yeah, sure. So it comes through in so many levels. So, and that's also why I really like these different approaches that I have. So through the art therapy, someone might become aware of, subconsciously what patterns they're continuing on. And energy wise, we're born carrying 7 generations worth of trauma. So a lot of times people feel, and I know I had this and I was able to explore it. And I started going to Reiki myself because even as a trauma therapist, for a while aware of what was mine and what was other people's, but you do it for long enough and you do it for enough hours in the day. And all of a sudden you start to lose sometimes, like you can feel anger or grief, but you kind of lose sight of what's mine. what's everyone else's.
Yeah.
And so Reiki in particular was really helpful for me to sort through that and release what wasn't mine and better understand what was. And in that process, I'm aware of the different kinds of trauma on both sides of my family line. But through Reiki, I was able to really fine tune understanding like certain things that have effects on me. And is it because of something that happened in my own current life?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it something that happened in a former life? Or is it something that happened to my grandparents on my mother's side or my great grandparents on my mother's side? And so through the energy work, we can figure that out. It just helps you figure out how to address it in life when you know where it came from. And then the energy work helps cut cords. And then moving into the Feng Shui, it was really interesting because then you can see it concretely show up too. So when you're in someone's house, you can help them understand, is this showing up in your space because it's a response to something that happened in your own life? Or is this something you learned from, it's been passed down 3 generations and it just is how it is, but it's not really serving you right now? So I really like how the Feng Shui is the same concept, but there's more visuals around you to show it concretely.
Yeah. And that is the thing. There's like practical things you can do, that kind of empower you in your space. And then they just continue working for you all day, all night. I mean, I think that's a real gift of this. So do you find that where people realize, okay, I'm carrying this trauma from my ancestors and I have this awareness that I have these patterns and this stuff is not even mine. Like this hasn't happened in this lifetime for me. It's a fear that's here and I don't even know why it's here, that way. And so when that awareness comes in, they're like, oh, okay, this is what happened to my great grandmother. This is what happened to my grandmother, or this is, and this story feels like it's playing out, but it's not really happening. It's just a fear that I carry because it's come down in my DNA. So do you feel that once that awareness is there, once we know where that's come from, do you feel that there is a release of that energy and it can be cleared, healed, released? Or do you think it's slightly always there, but you have the awareness?
That's a really good question. I think it's always there, but you have the awareness. Yeah. And I think that like there are certain things that I wish that part of me would wish that I could break, but then the other part of me doesn't want to cut off the wisdom that's passed on through it. Yeah. Like an animal is born knowing what animals are its predators. And if it wasn't born with that awareness, then it would probably die much younger than it would otherwise. So there's definitely, I believe, a really beautiful wisdom that's passed down through it. And then I think it's the same thing as when you're treating trauma. Let's just say you're treating PTSD from this lifetime. You might start by not knowing what's triggering a stress response. And then you do some work and you figure out, exactly what's triggering your stress response. And it wouldn't really serve you or make you relax more to feel like you should just forget about it because part of you wants to maintain that wisdom.
Yeah.
So then I think it's having that awareness and it's knowing how to be grounded enough in the moment that you can determine if it's worth having a fight or flight reaction for, or if it's worth in that moment actually taking a deep breath and relaxing for. So I don't think we want to, I don't think it serves us to totally shut down the wisdom. Yeah, exactly. I just think it's good to know it's there and then be able to take a moment to know how to respond with it.
I love that. And I think that pause, that moment is where the alchemy lies. Like where our conscious choice lies, where we get to make different choices. So I love that you say that. So if we stop and ground and like take a breath and go, okay, this is just this. I don't need to go into fight or flight or freeze or fawning or whatever the response is, right? What are, other than taking a breath, other ways that you would suggest that we can keep ourselves grounded, that we can give more length and presence to that pause? Is it things that we're doing in practices throughout our day? Is it a way of being? Love to hear your wisdom on that.
I love this question. So last week I was at a retreat for veterans for a week. Mm-hmm. And this certain retreat started off years ago as they were teaching the veterans transitioning out from service into more civilian life. They were teaching them career building skills, like how to write a resume, how to apply for jobs. And they were finding that even when people left with a beautiful resume, if they couldn't manage their stress, they weren't able to get a job anyway or keep a job anyway. So the shift of that program, the intention of that program has shifted to be more about providing psychoeducation on stress response and your window of tolerance and how to increase your heart rate variability and to become more aware of when you're doing certain things to come out of your window, whether you're flipping your lid or shutting down. So they get psychoeducation all morning, and then in the afternoon, they go through stations. They do yoga, Tai Chi, they do art therapy with me, and then some PT that has like physical challenges like high ropes course and things that are fun but stressful. And then they're able to actually have this circuit of ways where they're experiencing a little stress, but then also all these ways that they can actively use to ground. And then they all gravitate towards certain approaches. And to answer your question, I think one of the best things is just to make sure that you're integrating into your life times to meditate, times to get into flow state. So what I do in that setting, it's not really the place to do trauma processing. I do something called Zentangle, which is approach. It's like a meditative approach to drawing. And I guide step by step, and people draw really simple strokes at a time, but they wind up creating these really intricate images where someone came at the end, they'd be like, oh my goodness, how'd you make that? But it's all just created by patterns of really simple strokes and marks. And it's a really beautiful approach because people are able to find that meditative state of mind where their mind is quiet, where they're fully focused and concentrated. It's like one pointed focus, fully quiet mind. But I think a lot of people, especially when they feel like they should start meditating, but don't know how, they start and then they feel unsuccessful. So then they kind of let it drop off, or they don't really know how to quiet their mind. They might get frustrated. But when you're drawing, you're actively grounding the whole time. And so there's people who thought they could never get into a quiet state of mind who sustain it for an hour and a half, however long we're doing the drawing. And at first, they're really surprised from that experience. Oh my goodness, my mind got quiet. But then it's really surprising because they come back to me. Like if I'm doing this with someone on a weekly basis, I have someone I'm working with right now who just every time is in awe. She's like, I know my mind gets quiet when we do it, but I wasn't expecting it to really translate into my life. Like things that would normally really stress me out, I'm finding my mind just being so much more like clear and grounded when they're happening. So she's able, I think because we're able to get her in that state of mind for like a solid hour or hour and a half at a time, what it feels like. And it's easier to just embody it at a moment's notice.
I love that. New pathways, new experience of being like, oh, I didn't know this was possible. Now I know this is possible. Now I know how to do this for longer. Now, as they're coming back every week, and then perhaps they just start doing themselves during the week. And then I suppose that's how a practice starts, isn't it? Consistency, and that's beautiful. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing. And I your wisdom. And I know there's so much more beauty and so much more to share with us with all the gorgeous practices and how you've helped people in so many beautiful ways. So thank you for sharing that. And just maybe one last question before we close, like art therapy, but if they were just to get paper and pencils out right now, like what would you suggest that they can do today with themselves, whether they're feeling happy or sad or, going through something? Like, how can they kind of start to process and bring that calm mind in if they just got pencils and paper? What would you have?
Well, I'll give two answers. So if they want to learn this meditative drawing technique, I have YouTube videos. I have courses you can stream on my website, and they guide you through step by step. So there's an option for that. If someone wants to experience some genuine self-expression that helps them just release whatever is actually trying to claw its way out, even though we might be repressing it, it's a beautiful practice to just sit down. Like, a lot of times people think when they make art, they have to know what they're making before they start. And then they try to actualize what's in their head. But much of art therapy is the opposite approach, where we're guiding people to create very intuitively in the moment. And from that, we can allow our soul to speak, and then we can see what it has to say, and we can step more into our wholeness. And so one of my favorite things to do when I'm feeling feelings is to sit down. Oil pastels or chalk pastels are one of my favorites because you can really move them around and just start drawing how you feel using line shapes and colors. And the trick is, don't overthink it. Just grab the first color that speaks to you and see where it goes. And it will allow what needs to come out. And I say that with the caveat that having an art therapist like me, I can help you actually make sense of it. But at least when you do that, you'll be able to get that self-expression, that catharsis that's really important.
That's beautiful. And speaking of that, would you please let us know how we can find you? It'll all be in the show notes and everything, and the courses that you offer. We'd love to hear about that. And of course, people can work with you one-on-one as well, right? So we'd love to hear whatever you'd like to share, what you've created.
Yes, of course. So my name is Jackie Jones, and my business is Flourish Momentum, integrative health and wellness for mind, body, soul, and space. My website is flourishmomentum.com. And I'm really active on Instagram, just flourish_momentum. I have a YouTube channel with over 100 guided practices. So yeah, that's just youtube.com/Jackie Jones. And anyone, please connect with me, reach out if you have any questions at all. And then what I offer, mostly I work with people one-on-one. I have smaller packages. People can do a one-off or a 3-pack or a 12-pack. And then I have Elevate, which is my signature program where we do it all. Mm-hmm. So do it all. Including including the Feng Shui. So it's really beautiful. And then other than that, I like to do workshops and retreats. And so I'm available for those kinds of things too.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's incredible just hearing about your whole journey and how you witness your clients and how then they have these incredible tools for the rest of their life. Thank you for the beautiful work you're doing. Thank you for being here and sharing with us. And I love you.
I love you. Thank you so much for having me.